Hurrah for the Hussars! Napoleonic style wargame rules. Hello. In this video, I explain the background to and thinking behind my Hurrah for the Hussars rules that I am using for the Pelisse campaign, and summarise the key mechanisms of those rules. If having seen this video you want to explore the rules in more detail, then please drop an email to the channel email address as shown on screen, and I will email the rules back to you in a PDF. The first thing to understand is that these rules are not intended to produce a detailed simulation of a Napoleonic battle. They are intended to be straightforward rules that allow imaginary battles to be fought between the imaginary armies of imaginary nations, fighting in a manner that is similar to that seen in the Wars of Napoleon. They are intended to produce broadly believable outcomes in that context, but introducing a certain level of randomness and friction which is necessary as I play these rules solo. I also wanted to be able to start playing games with the rules relatively quickly and easily, and play on a small table. I therefore use small figures on small bases, 3mm figures on 2cm by 1cm bases, to be precise, which allows me to paint up armies crudely and quickly. The playing area I use is generally 3 feet by 4 feet. This is my second attempt to write a set of rules of this nature. The first attempt was the rules I used for the History of the Harriettenburg and its Environs campaign. Even though those rules were frequently changed over the course of that campaign, I never managed to get them to work in a way that satisfied me. Fighting the Harriettenburg battles successfully scratched my Napoleonic itch, and so at the end of the campaign I put the rules and figures away for a few years. But recently the itch returned, so I pulled them out from the back of the shelf and started to think once more about what I wanted from a Napoleonic-style rule set. There are 3 main troop types used in Napoleonic warfare: infantry, cavalry and artillery, all of which have different strengths and weaknesses. The way troops are used is regimented and formalised. Battlefield tactics focus on drill and adopting different formations. Manoeuvre is also important, getting the right troops in the right place and combining the different arms for best effect. I decided that the reason my previous rules had been unsatisfactory was that I had attempted to use a bottom-up approach, applying movement and combat rules at the level of individual bases. The idea was that removing individual bases as casualties would allow units to be degraded through combat, and the movement rules would allow bases to be placed in any formation desired, with the defensive and movement capabilities of each base determined by its position relative to other surrounding friendly bases. Thus the advantages and disadvantages of any formation would emerge organically, rather than being specified in the rules. I still think this would be a good way of writing Napoleonic rules, if you could get it to work. But I could not. It was always just too fiddly, and tracking combat outcomes at a base-by-base level required too much administration. I used to use counters, which meant the table always looked as if it had a particularly virulent case of measles. So, for the new rules, I took an entirely opposite, very simplified, top-down approach, doing everything at the unit level. The first thing was to specify unit types. I kept these to high-level categories as follows. Line infantry. These are foot soldiers who manoeuvre and fight in big, organised formations. Light infantry. These are foot soldiers who fight in open order. Now, historically, many regiments of line infantry would in practice throw out groups of skirmishers who would fight in open order. But having troops change type halfway through a battle was a complication I was not prepared to accept. so the two types are kept separate. If you want a regiment of line infantry to have some associated skirmishers, then, for game purposes, that is represented on the table by two units, a unit of line infantry and a unit of light infantry. Note that a unit of line infantry represents a battalion and a unit of light infantry represents a company, so at least in terms of troop numbers being represented, this does sort of work. We then have the cavalry. This is divided into heavy and light. I have not attempted to distinguish between all the different types of heavy and light cavalry, which seem to me to be a level of detail too far. I have taken a similarly simple approach to artillery, only distinguishing between regular artillery and horse artillery, and ignoring other differences, for example, between cannons and howitzers, or cannon firing different weights of shot. The last unit type is that each army will typically have an army commander. The next thing to consider was formations. Each type of unit has a limited number of different formations that it can adopt. The formation is shown by how the bases in the unit are arranged on the table. So, the two basic formations are the march column, where all the bases are placed one behind the other, and the line, where the bases are placed side by side. These are the only formations that can be adopted by cavalry and artillery. Line infantry can also be arranged in attack column, where the unit's bases are placed in two rows of two bases, all facing in the same direction, and square, where the bases are arranged facing outward to form a square. Light infantry cannot form into line, but they do have the option of being put into open order, where bases can be arranged in any which way the controlling player desires, as long as every base in the unit is within 4 inches of every other base in the unit. This is the only formation where bases do not have to be in aligned edge-to-edge contact. The army commander is represented by a single base and is always considered to be in march column. The number of bases in each type of unit is specified. This keeps things simple, and as units are only divided into bases to allow different formations to be represented, there was no need to allow for any flexibility. Line and light infantry units consist of 4 bases, light cavalry units of 3 bases, heavy cavalry and artillery units have 2 bases, and, as just mentioned, the army commander is represented by a single base. The final concept is a unit to resilience. This is a measure of the quality of the unit, which affects its ability to perform actions as ordered, and also its ability to absorb damage. For average units, the resilience is 5. For elite units, it is 6, and green or otherwise poor quality units will have a resilience of 4. As I prefer, all dice are standard 6-sided dice, and all distances on the table are measured in inches. Now we turn to game structure and unit activation, a core element of any wargame. Hurrah for the Hussars uses a very similar system to my Manic Medieval Mayhem rule set, for the compelling reason that I consider this to be the best system to use for battle games, where each base represents a group of people. For skirmish games, where one figure equals one person, I prefer card-based activation, which randomises the order in which figures activate, as I feel this better captures the confused and chaotic nature of individual combat. But this is a battle game, so the approach used is that at the beginning of the turn, the players roll for initiative. The player with the initiative then activates a unit, which performs an action. The other player can then activate a unit. Play alternates in this manner until all units have been activated, or until no player wishes to activate any more units. When a unit is activated, a die is rolled. The unit's current resilience is added to the result. The actions that the unit can choose to take are constrained by this modified die roll, as shown on the table on screen. A unit that has been activated must take an action and can only take one action. I will now briefly describe each of the actions. A move action allows the unit to take up to two of the following three sub-actions. 1. Reverse facing. 2. Advance. 3. Pivot. The sub-actions can be taken in any order, and each may only be performed once in a given movement action. They are pretty self-explanatory, but for clarity, a unit that reverses facing turns all its bases through 180 degrees. The unit's footprint on the table is unchanged, but all its bases now face in the opposite direction. A pivoting unit can rotate around its centre point by up to 90 degrees. An advancing unit may move forward in a straight line in the direction that it is facing. The unit may advance up to its movement distance in inches. Movement distances depend on formation and unit type, as shown in the table on screen. The key point here is that units in march column can move more rapidly than units in other formations, but, as we shall see, are unable to attack and have a restricted ability to defend themselves. This is, I think, reflective of the realities of the Napoleonic battlefield. It is also worth noting that the movement rules are quite restrictive. This is intended to reflect the difficulty of manoeuvring large groups of men in parade ground order across a battlefield. It requires a bit of forethought as to where you want to go and how you are going to get there. There are a couple of special rules regarding movement. Units in square cannot move. If a light infantry unit is in open order, then basically each base moves individually up to the unit's movement distance, subject to maintaining the cohesion of the unit. A withdraw action is identical to a move action, with the added constraint that, after moving, the unit must be no closer to the then nearest enemy unit than it was before it moved. Note that a withdrawing unit can opt simply to remain in its current position. A change formation action is straightforward. The unit changes formation from its current formation to a different formation permitted to that unit. This is achieved by leaving one base exactly where it is. If desired, this base can be turned on the spot through 180 degrees. The other bases in the unit are then arranged in the desired formation around this fixed base. A rally action increases the unit's current resilience by 1 point, up to a maximum of the unit's original resilience value, so a maximum of 6 for elite, 5 for average, and 4 for poor quality units. A unit taking a fire action remains stationary in place. Only infantry and artillery units may fire, and only if they are in certain formations, as shown in the table on screen. Artillery may fire shot or canister, which is why 2 sets of firing statistics are shown for these units. Firing is always by 1 unit at 1 unit. Firing is subject to the constraints of range, field of fire, and line of sight. Range can be short or long, which is why 2 range numbers are shown. A unit with a 360-degree field of fire can fire in any direction. A unit with a forward field of fire can only fire at an enemy unit that has at least one of its bases completely within the area bounded by lines diverging at 45 degrees from the front corners of the firing unit, as shown on screen. Line of sight requires a clear corridor 1 inch wide that does not cross another unit or blocking terrain. To resolve fire, calculate the to-hit number. The basic to-hit number is 4+. Increase the to-hit number by 1 if the target is at long range. Increase it by 1 if the target is in open order. Reduce it by 1 if the firing unit is artillery or horse artillery, firing shot at a line infantry unit that is in attack column or square. Roll the number of firing dice specified in the table. Count the number of hits. Reduce the resilience of the target unit by that amount. If resilience falls to 0 or less, immediately remove the target unit from the table. That's it for firing. Now let's talk about charging. Only units in line or attack column may charge. A unit taking a charge action first advances directly forward in a straight line into contact with an enemy unit, moving a distance up to its movement allowance. The charging unit must move directly forward. It cannot reverse facing or pivot. If after moving into contact, either the charging or the charged unit, or both, are in a position to fire on the other, then they do so. This firing is resolved in the usual manner. It is assumed to be simultaneous. Assuming that both units are still on the table, calculate the 2-hit number. This depends on the formation of the unit that has been charged, as set out in the table on screen. Apply modifiers to the 2-hit number as shown. The 2-hit number cannot be increased above 6 or reduced below 2. The charging unit now rolls a die. If this is greater than or equal to the 2-hit number, the charged unit has its resilience reduced by 1, and the charging unit rolls again. This process is repeated until either the charged unit has its resilience reduced to 0 and is removed from play, or the charging unit rolls less than the 2-hit number. In this case, the charging unit's resilience is reduced by 1 and it is moved 1 inch directly back the way it advanced, opening up a gap between the units, unless its resilience has been reduced to 0, in which case it is removed from play. Whether it is moved back or removed, that brings the charge action to a finish. The next thing to talk about is the army commander. Each force can have 1. When the army commander is activated, it may take an action like any other unit, or it can forego its own activation and instead activate any friendly unit within 2 inches of the army commander. In this latter case, the army commander takes no action, but is counted as having been activated that turn. The activation roll is based on the resilience of the unit that is actually activated, rather than the resilience of the army commander, and the activation does not count as the activated unit's activation for that turn. So if the unit so activated has not yet been activated that turn, then it can be activated again later in the turn for its regular activation. The other special ability of the army commander is that it can move through friendly units, and friendly units can move through it. That brings us on to one of the final areas to cover, which is terrain. The terrain rules are pretty simple. Movement distances are reduced by 2 inches if the unit encounters any difficult terrain in its move. Difficult terrain includes woodland and areas of heavy going. Certain types of terrain are impassable, e.g. water and buildings. Woodland is impassable to cavalry and artillery. Line of sight is blocked by buildings, woodland, high ground and other units. In order to track unit status during the game, I use a simple dashboard. This includes a description of each unit, so it can be recognised on the table. There is a space to write the unit's starting resilience. A die can then be placed in that space to track the unit's resilience as it changes during the game. In order to track which units have been activated during each turn, there is also a space in which to place a counter when the unit is activated. And that is really about it. As I said earlier, if you want a PDF of the rules, then please do send the channel an email. And goodbye until the next video.